everyone and welcome back to the channel. The 2022 road season for the men and for the women is over, and it's time to give the most prestigious awards in cycling, the James Talk Cycling Awards. So join me over in the studio now, where I go through my awards, my winners, my losers, and give you my riders for the men and for the women's season. Moving on to some of the team and individual awards now, I'm going to give you my worst and best teams of the 2022 cycling season. Kick things off with the men's worst results, and you had a lot to contend with. Astana only had 5 wins. Israel Premier Tech really struggled yet again. Outside of Arnaud Delis, Lotto Soudal, and Bike Exchange as well, outside of Dylan Gruner, we're going to struggle to pick up results. However, for me, the worst team by some stretch is Astana Premier Tech, or Astana Kazakhstan. Can't remember which it is. Miguel Angel Lopez and Gianni Moscon were their big signings for the season, and they had absolute shockers. Moscon was ill quite a lot during the spring and never truly recovered. Lopez, he's one of the best climbers in the world, but when he's not on form, he's one of the worst as well. And he only picked up 1 win. Moscon wasn't great. Alexei Lusenko, he won an early Spanish one-day race, but apart from that, he didn't offer too much. So only 5 wins, not much presence in all the other races. For me, Astana are the worst men's team in the peloton this year. On to the women's worst team of the season now, and for me, there's only one winner, and that is SD Works. They have struggled to replace Anna van der Breggen at the top end of women's GC riding. She would have been able to compete with Van Vleuten at the Giro and the Tour and the Vuelta, but retired, and Demi Vollering, Ashley Mormon-Passio, and the others just aren't quite ready to step up to fight Van Vleuten. Vollering was the best of the rest at the Tour de France Femme. And yes, they may have won Strade Bianchi, and yes, they may have won the Tour of Flanders, but outside of that, they haven't collected too many big wins, especially on the GC. So for me, that is why SD Works are the worst women's team of 2022. On to the best women's team of 2022, and you've got 3 nominations for me. Movistar won all 3 Grand Tours. DSM had a gazillion wins with Lorena Wiebes, and FDJ, who surprised many, and they won a lot of big races. And for me, from where they came at the start of the season, we expected Movistar to be strong. We expected DSM to be strong. We thought SD Works would be stronger. For me, FDJ, with winning a stage at the Tour de France Femme, as I said earlier in a previous show, the day after their race was obliterated in the GC, with Cavalli crashing out and Ludwig crashing as well. They won Fletcher Wallonne, they won Amstel Gold. Cavalli was fantastic this season. Ludwig was fantastic and an excellent individual presence. They also had the rises of Vittoria Garzini and Ivica Music as well. For me, they have been the best team. From where we expected them to be at the start of the year to now, FDJ are the best. On to the men's best teams now, and really there can only be one winner. Alpecin were impressive with the win at Flanders, Philipsen's sprints wins at the Tour, and Mathieu van der Poel at the Giro. UAE with Pogacar, but also Ayuso and Almeida. Intermarché just had a fantastic year. Herman's picking up good results. Gamay picking up good results. But there can only really be one winner, and that is Team Jumbo-Visma. Wout van Aert had a dominant spring campaign until he got COVID. We sadly will never know whether he would have beaten Mathieu van der Poel at Flanders or Dylan van Baarle at Roubaix, although he was second at Roubaix. So that indicates something. Jonas Vingegaard was a consistent presence up in the races in Tirreno, in the Basque Country, Dauphiné, and then won the Tour. Primoz Roglic, aside from taking Fred Wright out, or trying to anyway, was consistent. He won Paris-Nice and the Dauphiné, but then struggled in the Grand Tours a bit. He was pretty good at the Vuelta, to be fair. And outside of the World Tour, but into the World Tour, we had Olaf Koy showing that he is one of the next sprinters on the block to be the best, really. So for me, E3, Omloop, Dauphiné, Paris-Nice, Tour de France. I could go on and on and on about what they achieved this year. The amount of 1-2-3s, the amount of 1-2s. They signed Christophe Laporte. He's been a huge benefit to Jumbo-Visma. Tish Benoot as well. Jumbo-Visma easily were the best right team of 2022. Moving on to the surprise packages of 22, and this goes to the rider that we expected to be good this year and show improvement, but we didn't expect to win or be quite as good as he or she have been. The men's surprise packages are pretty simple. Bimiam Ghana winning Wevelgem and a stage at the Giro was a big surprise. Arnaud Delis winning however 9 or 10 races for Lotto Soudal. But for me, the winner is Timon Arsman from DSM. He came into the year probably looking to be the domestic for Romain Bardet at Tirreno, the Giro, and then maybe get a free card at the Vuelta. And it started well for him. He was the leader and he finished 6th at Tirreno. He then finished on the podium and helped Bardet win the Tour of the Alps. He was then a fantastic domestique in the first 2 weeks for Bardet. And then after Bardet was ill and got sent home, was an aggressive card, nearly winning a couple of stages in the final week of the Giro. We then move on to the Vuelta, where he really showcased what he could do as a GC rider. He was consistency personified, but then in that final week again, or just before the final week, he was aggressive, got into a breakaway to Sierra Nevada, won Sierra Nevada, and finished 6th overall. So to go from where we were to a stage in the Grand Tour, top 10 in a Grand Tour, a strong 3-week rider with Ineos next year, who knows what he can achieve. I've already touched on her as the women's surprise package, but Marta Cavalli is without doubt the best surprise package of the women's calendar this year. She won Amstel Gold, she won Fletcher Malone, she won the Mont Ventoux Challenge. She finished 2nd overall, which is really interesting, in the Giro Donne behind Van Vleuten. And I think she would have done the similar at the Tour de France Femme had she not been taken out by Nicola Frame. So easy to see why, alongside FDJ, that Marta Cavalli gets the award for Women's Surprise Package of 2022. Moving on with the individual awards, I'm going to move on to the disappointment or disappointments of the men's and women's season. And I could easily give the men's award to Moscon and Lopez, but for me, Moscon's got a mitigating circumstances with his ill health during the start of the season. Other nominations, Tom Pidcock Spring, although again, mitigating circumstances, he wasn't feeling great. Yakov Fulsang, Alexei Lusenko, plenty of other options from Astana, Lotto, Israel Tech, and Bike Exchange. However, for me, the disappointment of the year goes to Superman Miguel Angel Lopez. One win in a stage of the Tour of the Alps and was really kind of nowhere to be seen in any other races. He's a bit of an enigma, as we saw from the 2021 Vuelta. On his day, he is one of the best climbers, if not the best climber in the world. But those are few and far between, and his time trial is, to put it politely, shocking. So Lopez is the disappointment of 2022 season. Moving on to the women's disappointment of 2022, and I could have gone for the likes of Demi Vollering and Ashley Moolman-Pasio because of what they didn't do in the Grand Tours, but then they also picked up wins in Romandy and in the Basque Country and plenty of other places. So for me, I expected a lot more in the Grand Tours and in the one-day races from Mavi Garcia. I expected her not to maybe fight for the wins in the GC or the one-day races, but I expected her to be more aggressive, more willing to attack and have better fitness. I don't know if she was ill at all, but I expected a lot more from Mavi Garcia. Finish my cycling awards with three positive awards, and the first one for that will be the signing of the season. For me, the women's signing of the season is pretty simple. Lotte Kopecky moving over to SD Works. She won Strade Bianche. She won the Tour of Flanders. She was one of the very few consistent riders for SD Works this year. And yeah, she didn't pick up a win at the Tour, but she was up there on the sprint stages and then up there helping Vollering in some of the mountains and hills as well. So for me, Lotte Kopecky easily is the signing of the season for the women's. Men's signing of the year was a bit harder to pick than the women's. Arnaud Delis, Gamay, Laporte, Sheffield. But for me, his consistency throughout the year, his ability on all sorts of terrain, the card he now is for Wout van Aert on the cobbles, and finally picking up his Tour de France stage win. Christophe Laporte is without doubt the signing of the year. He was going to be good, but that stage in Paris that he lit up E3 with Wout van Aert. Didn't see the best of him in Flanders or Roubaix, but we had already seen enough to see how good he was. And then he showed off his climbing talent at the Tour de France. What a tour for Christophe Laporte. Moving on to the newcomer or the Neo Pro of 2022, and the men's Neo Pro or newcomer of the year for me is Bimian Gumay from Eritrea. We knew he was good. We saw how good he could be at the World Championships last year. Baroncini is the winner that year, is taking a bit longer to develop. Arnaud Delis won a lot of races, but at the 2.0 level, so we need to see that progression. Olaf Koy, similar. Bimian Gumay for me is the best because he was up there in San Remo. He won Ghent Wevelgem, which was fantastic. That's a brilliant win. And then he was not only won a stage at the Giro, but he was very close to beating Mathieu van der Poel on stage one and on a few other stages. So we could see a future green jersey contender from him. What can he do next? Or what can he do next? Flanders, Roubaix, Amstel would be a decent one for him. For me, he needs to be able to be a bit more aggressive, but he's got the world at his feet, and he's got a nation, a continent even, at his feet. The women's newcomer of the year. Next year's is going to be quite easy, I think. Zoe Baxter, but this year's was a bit difficult, so I had to really trawl through the results to try and find a good one. And Vittoria Guazzini, the Italian for FDJ, um, she had a very consistent year. She was working for Music, Cavalli, and Ludwig most of the time, but she also managed to pick up some decent results herself. So didn't win next year. Well, to see that progression to get some wins, but great start to her career. And finally, the most prestigious awards in cycling. They don't win anything, but um, they don't win anything. The Riders of the Year. And in women's racing, we only really had two choices for me. Lorena Wiebes is the queen of sprinting, and Van Vleuten is the queen of pretty much everything else. Um, and three Grand Tours and a World Championships, and Annemiek van Vleuten, easily, without doubt, is the best rider in the women's peloton at the moment, potentially even across the board. Um, she's possibly retiring at the end of next year, but what a career she's had. And if this is the final big season of hers, which it won't be, she'll win everything next year. What a season it has been. The men's ridery of the year nominations are as followed. Tadej Pogacar, he won. UAE, Strada Bianchi, Tirreno Adriatico. 3 stages and a white jersey and a podium at the Tour de France. Tour of Slovenia and Lombardia. Jonas Vingegaard was consistent at the stage races, second at Tirreno, 6th at Basque Country, second but should have won, could have won the Dauphiné, and then had the crowning moment at the Tour. Wout van Aert, E3, Omloop, and then green jersey and 3 stages, and just a machine at the Tour de France. And the final nomination is Remco Evenepoel. Liège, La Vuelta, Sebastian, the Worlds. And for me, I expected for Pogacar to be good. I was a bit surprised that he lost the Tour, but that was because the second nomination, Jonas Vingegaard and Jumbo-Visma, were just too strong for him. Wout van Aert, he missed a monument due to COVID, which, as I said earlier, is a great shame. And he missed the move from Remco at the Worlds. So for me, they have all been brilliant. But the reason why Remco Evenepoel, for me, is the rider of the year is because at the start of the year, it was the start of his sort of monument or GC journey. And he has been brilliant. He has learnt from Tirreno, he has learnt from the Basque Country, he learnt from the Tour de Suisse, and then went and put it all together at the Vuelta a España. He put a fantastic 3 weeks together, but for 2 days where he lost time, and you can roughly put that down to the crash he had. He was fantastic, and I don't think he would have lost that even had Roglic still been in the race. And then he added, and then before that, he showed just how insanely talented he is on the climbs. With Liège attacking on the top of the La Redoute and soloing ish to a victory. And then the Worlds, where he just rode away from Lysenko on that on that penultimate climb. Congratulations, Remco. You have been the rider of 2022, and you win the final award for the men's rider of the year. So there we have it. Cycling awards for the road season for the men and the women have been done. Join me for the cyclocross winter, where I hopefully can go and see the racing in the mainland. Thank you, and I'll see you next time on James Talks Cycling.